my torch, the one that I have, has got many flames. Not one flame, it's got many flames. And the flames that I tell them is no religious discrimination, no racial discrimination, no homophobia, no xenophobia, no hatred. And above all, the most important flame in that torch is no hatred of others, that you must accept everybody as yourself.
As you can tell, Pinchas Gutter's torch is a very special one. Moreover, he is a very special person. Pinchas is a Holocaust survivor, community activist, and documentarian. In 2014, President Barack Obama, speaking at the Shoah Foundation Humanity Gala, quoted Pinchas at length. Obama said as follows, quote, "I think of Pinchas Gutter, a man who lived through the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising and survived the Majdanek death camp. I tell my story," Pinchas says, "for the purpose of improving humanity, drop by drop by drop. Like a drop of water falls on a stone and erodes it, so hopefully by telling my story over and over again, I will achieve the purpose of making the world a better place to live in." Those are the words of one survivor performing that sacred duty of memory that will echo throughout eternity. Those are good words for all of us to live by, Obama concluded. Those words are quite fitting. As you will hear throughout this podcast, Pinchas's message and story are powerful and unique. If you enjoy the content and message we're putting out, please consider donating to us either through PayPal for single-time donations or Patreon for monthly contributions. They can be found on our homepage under the donation tab. They really do make a difference helping support our writers and keep this whole thing running. If you haven't already, please like, subscribe, and follow us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you find yourselves listening. Thank you again. You've been doing a lot of stuff when it comes to international Holocaust remembrance throughout your whole life, really. You're probably one of the biggest figures in the world when it comes to raising awareness and speaking with people about it. And you probably get asked this question a lot, but why is it so meaningful, and why is it so important of an event, and why is it important that we remember this?
Well, I mean, the reason why I tell people my particular, experiences during the Second World War, but I also talk about what happened before, my life before the war and my life after the war. And the important aspect of telling what happened in the Shoah is that it's a very, apart from anything else, it's a very unique experience in the history of humanity, in the sense that a very sophisticated, educated country decided to turn into a violent, ideological, nationalist kind of, horrible period, taken over by gangsters, basically. And they created a mechanical, commercial way of murdering people who they regarded, because of their crazy ideology, who they regarded as not being fit to exist on this planet. Now, this is a very unique experience. But that's not the only one that happened. I mean, it started off, many murdering hordes have been around going back to times immemorial. I mean, Genghis Khan and the Armenian Holocaust, genocide by the Turks, and what's happening today with the, with the Myanmar and the Uyghurs from China and Kosovo and Rwanda. I mean, all these things are happening at the moment in the sense that people are killing each other. And the purpose of me, of telling them, is that, number one, what was, what happened, and it shouldn't happen, and what should be in the future. So basically, my purpose is to try and educate, especially younger people, in the sense that they should understand the possibilities, because basically we are, especially in the Jewish tradition, we've got, I don't know if you know any Hebrew, it's called Yetzer Hora and Yetzer Tov. We've got, this angel of goodness, or that aspect of goodness in us, the aspect of evil, which is fighting all the time. And we are fighting it internally. And then, of course, you get these terrible demagogues who come along and inspire the bad part of us and make it possible for us to go along. I mean, all you have to do is have a look what happened, just now in the capital in Washington, just before the certification of the new president. I mean, people were riled by I regard Trump as a demagogue, and he created in them a climate which they believed every lie that he came out with, and they created that. And that's what I am fighting against. I'm trying to, through my kind of varied history of what happened before the war and what happened historically to the Jews, and what happened during the Shoah particularly, and what can and how good it can be in the future, this is what I'm trying to achieve by telling them my story in a way which I create an empathy towards creating a better world.
Right. And so you've talked about so many recent events, the Capitol riots, but also before that, looking at some of the mass violence in Myanmar you were talking about, in Syria, in Kosovo. Do you feel that the lessons that we should have learned from the Holocaust and from the Armenian genocide, do you think that we have learned these lessons, or is humanity still struggling to fully adopt those lessons? Where are we on that?
Well, I am basically an optimist, and I believe that, I mean, if you just take, for example, just one example, when the Syrian refugees were being chased out because of what was going on there, I'm talking about a couple of years ago, the Canadian government decided to bring in, according to the to the media that we get and the information that we've been given, is they're taking in tens of thousands of Syrian refugees. Also, a lot of people, individual families, sponsored others. In other words, there was an immediate response towards the suffering of a section of humanity which everybody had empathy towards. So that shows that the world is going towards a better place. It's doing it very, very, very slowly. But can you imagine what would have happened in 1930s when the German Jews started having problems in Germany, and the doors would have been open for other countries, including those great Western countries like the United States and England and France, and I mean some of them did allow, but it was, and then they had the Evian Conference. I don't know if you know something about the Evian Conference, and which nobody wanted it, except one South American country, the Dominican Republic, decided to take some Jews in. But apart from that, nobody wanted these Jews. And at one stage, Hitler and the Nazi ideology was to get rid of the Jews. We don't know when it changed completely, because it's not quite clear. Because on the one hand, I think he always had the idea of getting rid of the Jewish population of the world if he could have conquered the whole world. But in the meantime, he wanted to get rid of them. So if he could have got rid of them, all those 500,000 Jews that lived in Germany could have gone. But 300,000 actually did leave, but only because of the endeavor of individuals. Individuals like, I just read about Wilfred Israel and other people who went out of their way. A British consul general, the kinder transport. So quite a lot of people, and a lot of people went to Israel. The big colony of German Jews in Israel, in what that was Palestine. But the doors were closed. Now there is a movement. Germany took in close to 1 million refugees. And everybody was against it, even in their own country. But the fact is that the governments have responded.
Mm-hmm.
But then you also have that ugly face of nationalism, which is actually creating havoc now. You know, the ugly head of anti-Semitism, of racialism, of the nationalistic aspect, especially in Eastern Europe, has become very, very strong. They try to become, individualistic. In other words, only we are the greatest. We are the only ones. And they play up to that aspect of the individual, where you make him feel that he is a better person than the one next to it. And as far as I'm concerned, to me, we are all the same. Every one of us is the same person, the same human being. It doesn't matter whether you are Chinese and whether your eyes look slightly different, or the way your color is different, whether you are black or whether you are, slightly, pink or whatever your color. We are human beings coming from exactly the same place. We even have, according to the traditions, if you really think about it, all the religions believe in one God. They don't believe that there are many, many gods. They've got representations. For example, in America, in Russia, they've got all these icons. And in the Buddhism, they've got all these figures. But in actual fact, they don't. They regard this as representation of a higher power. And Christianity, Judaism, Christianity and Muslim comes directly from Judaism. And they only believe in one God. They don't believe in hundreds of gods. So the fact is that we actually have a lot in common. So why can't we get together eventually? So the problem is that we have rulers, demagogues, people that are out for power, and they are play up. They are they unleash the spirit of a kind of nationalism, which is very easy to follow, and that is the big problem.
And how do you stay so optimistic? Because you called yourself an optimist. We spoke to a Holocaust survivor a couple of days ago as well, Leslie Mizai, and he also calls himself an optimist. And it seems that a lot of Holocaust survivors, very paradoxically, actually have a very good outlook on humans, and they see the better aspects of human nature. How does that come about?
Well, I think that if you've suffered, you try, and first of all, for example, I've been doing welfare work in the community for the last 40 odd years. Why am I doing that? I don't get involved in any political things. I'm not interested in joining any political factions. But right from the beginning, when I arrived in Canada, the first thing I did, I joined there was a committee in those days, which is it doesn't exist anymore, the Mayor's Committee for the Aged. And I was on that committee, and I was on the executive, and I went to different homes, and I tried to make something better for elderly people when I was, my early 50s. Because if you suffered, your empathy is towards alleviating suffering. You don't want people to suffer. And there is no question that since the Second World War, there are times that change. For a long, long time, things were actually moving in the right direction. At the moment, there are some changes, and the reason why there are changes is because what is happening at the moment is that there's I don't even want to talk about the pandemic, which is bad enough, but before that, the fact that the structure of society is changing because of the IT technology, of this new way of working, of this new way of having robots and stuff like that. And a lot of people are very concerned about their jobs. I mean, you finish university and you have a high degree, but then you have to start looking for a job, and it's very difficult to get a job unless you are in that kind of field which everybody wants you, and that's not a very loud field. So we don't teach humanities because nobody wants to know about humanities. I mean, it's not important. Humanities is more important than anything else, but it's not important. So we are going through a stage which hopefully will change, because people always come back to what is really necessary. And it happened each time when it was the steam engine came along. But then people started realizing, and they started the welfare society, and so forth. So at the moment, we are going through a very bad stage because a lot of people are terribly dissatisfied. They don't have jobs, and the young people don't know where they're going to be. I mean, pensions are not guaranteed anymore. Once upon a time, if you worked for a firm for 30, 40 years, you retired and you lived quite well. I mean, I am on pension and I'm doing, I'm not rich, but I'm not poor. I have enough to live on, and so forth, so on, and I don't have to worry about what do you call it. But that was before, because before that, that's how it worked. So we are optimistic because we feel that, I said this before, that drop by drop by drop, the world is changing for a better place. It's going to take a long time, and we have to be very patient. And there are these different, times that change. And at the moment we are in a transition. We are in a social transition where everything is changing, and on top of it, we also are subject to this terrible pandemic, which we trying to hopefully get rid of as soon as possible, and once all these vaccines become available. So that's, I think, why Holocaust survivors are optimistic, because they believe in the future, and we try and educate the children in the future.
Do you ever see, in these moments of turmoil and revolution and change, do you ever see alarm bells and fear that's going off because you've experienced, and your parents and your grandparents had experienced a revolutionary time, a time where society was in upheaval and it didn't go the proper way? Do you ever fear that it can go one of two directions? It can either take this challenge and society and humanity can elevate, or it can also descend into worse things?
Well, at the moment, I would say I am very concerned about which way this is going to go, especially when you have a myriad of specific governments worldwide who are despotic and certainly not democratic, but they are dictatorial. I mean, you see that in Eastern Europe, which, regardless of the fact that they're part of the European Union, they are now moving towards this terribly nationalistic movement where, where we are individual aspect of their society is more important than the moral and the human side of life. And so that's very, very worrying. The fact that antisemitism is actually, growing fast in Western Europe, in Eastern Europe, and particularly in Eastern and Western Europe, and even in Canada. I mean, you don't have to go very far. But in Canada, continuously, if you read the statistics, there are more incidents. I mean, they're not violent, but you get swastikas on Jewish, synagogues and Jewish, institutions, and you get people being abused when they walk around with a yarmulke, or they recognize as being Jews, like in Montreal, particularly, in the French-speaking parts. So it is very concerning, and I am particularly worried.
The second segment will be coming up shortly. While we have you here, we just wanted to thank you again for your continued support. We're proud to say that we've begun receiving donations and patrons from places we never really expected. If you wish to help us continue this amazing project, please consider donating to us through PayPal or Patreon. Both can be found under the donation tab on our homepage. If you haven't already, please like, subscribe, and follow us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you find yourselves listening. And now Pinchas and I continue our discussion. Pinchas raises some interesting questions about the relationship between Holocaust survivors and Indigenous Canadians, as well as his outlook on whether life is getting better today or worse. Thank you again and enjoy.
Regardless of anything, a lot of people believe that Trump was going to be re-elected. Well, he wasn't re-elected. And Biden's governing and the whole government, the whole thing is changing slowly. Now, how much influence that will have and how long it will stay and whether it'll change long term or not, we don't know. It depends purely what he will achieve in the next 4 years. The whole thing can turn around. And I think because of the United States is such an important, influence over the world altogether, it depends how they manage to achieve their, problems, which they actually have with these militia and all these other, kind of people that are, Al-Anon and others. I think the world will, and you have mechanism. You still have the United Nations, and I know a lot of people regard the United Nations as the kind of spoiled nations because they don't do anything, or the disunited nations because they don't seem to be able to agree. And then you have the special council, where 5 countries have got vetoes, and the Chinese and the Russians. Anytime you want to do something good, the Chinese and the Russians put the veto on it. So you don't know. You take what's happening in Myanmar now. Discussing it at the special meetings of the United Nations Security Council, but Security Council, they are dictatorships. Russia is a dictatorship. I mean, Putin is a dictator. I mean, he's like a tsar. I mean, he behaves like a tsar, and all you have to do, where he lives and how people kowtow to him. So from that point of view, this is very concerning. But there are organisms, there are regulations, there are, safeguards with the United Nations and others, and it depends purely how the democratic countries are going to be able to overcome this, which way we are going to go. I mean, hopefully there won't be another explosion because, these kind of things lead to world war.
You had mentioned before about anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is resurgent. The levels of hate crimes are going up, especially against Jewish communities in Europe, America, Canada. And it also is coming from left and right-wing parties. You have, obviously, white supremacist groups, and you also have people who are militantly anti-Israel. Is that as well a point of deep concern for you? What do you think about? You've really seen almost everything when it comes to anti-Semitism and being targeted for a Jew, and you've been and lived throughout the world. Today, standing from where you are in Canada and seeing current events, that concern you?
Well, I think that as far as I'm concerned, me personally, I worry more about this aspect of what is happening at this particular moment. This ugly face of anti-Semitism that is being raised all over the world. It's not here, there, and everywhere, but particularly, I think it is being kind of it's being fired by. I'm trying to find the right word. It's being kind of propagated mostly in the Muslim world, which is which is trying to get rid of Eretz Israel, of Israel itself, And so they're trying to they're coming up with the all kinds of lies about Jews, like the Elders of Zion, that book that was falsified by the Russian, security services. They use the pictures and the trope that Stürmer did during before the Second World War and during the Second World War. They use all kinds of and they teach their children, and I'm talking about not everywhere, but in some Eastern, not Eastern, some Muslim countries, they actually, particularly in Palestine and in places like Syria and even in Turkey and other places which are, very anti-Jewish. They're not anti-Israel. They're anti-Jewish, and Jews have got no place to be. This is our fatherland. We were chased out, and now we reclaim only part of it. I mean, it's only part of it. When you come to think of it, we the old Judea and the old Israel and Judea was over the Jordan and everything. The British gave away part of it to Jordan, and they created a king there, and so forth and so on. And the United Nations divided Israel, so it's a very small country.
I think you have, sorry to interrupt you, but I think you have an interesting perspective because you have lived a life as a refugee and you've experienced that, but you've also lived a life that's experienced and encountered a lot of anti-Semitism. And so when we were talking about the Syrian refugee crisis, I was curious, what do you think about that? Because a lot of times when you're looking in Europe right now, one of the driving forces behind rising levels of anti-Semitism are Muslim communities in Europe. And a lot of them are coming from refugee camps and being settled in Europe. How do you weigh those things? How do you weigh those two causes between making sure that Jewish communities feel safe and secure, but on the other hand, being humanitarian and helping refugee communities resettle and escape war zones?
It's an extremely difficult question to answer because I can't think of an immediate solution to this particular problem. The only way that this could be the only way this could be solved is by integrating these refugees into the countries in which they live and imbue them with the culture and the moral and the social structure of the country, like if they are in France or if they are in Germany or wherever they are. Now, to a certain extent, the fault lies with the governments and with the structure of the countries themselves, because it's no good letting in refugees if you don't take them in and integrate them properly into your own culture. They can have a separate religion, just like Jews. Jews have always had their own religion, but they have integrated into the society, and they were well integrated into society, despite the fact that we are accused of all kinds of different things. We integrate ourselves in the society. So the important thing is, as far as I'm concerned, the future of either success or not would be how well those refugees are being integrated into the social mores of the countries that they have arrived in.
And it's funny, that dovetails with, in your book, Memories in Focus, the last chapter, you really talk about the hope that you have, and that one of the major initiatives, which you think is the most important thing to making a better world, is education, educating upcoming generations and integrating them intellectually into how to think about different peoples, different cultures. And that seems to be a major theme of what your message is when you talk about Holocaust remembrance.
Well, this is what I fervently believe in. I believe in that the only way that you can, but you see, it's not just educating, it's the way you educate the young people. It's the way you educate them, and then you structure the society in such a way where there's education dovetails with the structure. Because if you go to school and they tell you one thing, and then you come home and your parents tell you something else, because they are they are very much involved in a political kind of lies and stuff like that. So you are in betwixt and between, and you don't really know where to go. And usually, you will go with what the crowd is, what your friends are, and you won't listen to, and the education will not help. So the fact is, education in its own, in the schools and universities and so forth and so on, is not sufficient. The education has to be through media, has to be at home. You have to create a climate in your society where that the education goes home. I'll give you an example. I don't know if you know that. When I finish my talk, usually they always ask me, "So what are you going to leave me with? What do I leave them with? What is my message?" My message is as follows. I carry a torch. A torch like the Olympic torch. Well, every child, everybody knows what the Olympic torch is. The Olympic torch has got one flame, and it's a flame of goodwill between athletes and between humanity. It's trying to do kind of goodwill. It's all goodwill, light the flame of goodwill and compete in a correct way and so forth and so on. But my torch, the one that I have, has got many flames, not one flame. It's got many flames. And the flames that I tell them is no religious discrimination, no racial discrimination, no homophobia, no xenophobia, no hatred. And above all, the most important flame in that torch is no hatred of others, that you must accept everybody as yourself, that you are just as much a human, that your neighbor, your friend, the person that you live with, regardless of the way he looks like or the way he prays, he is exactly the same as you. He's got the same stripes. And I hand this torch to all these children. I say, no, I want you to go and spread this torch. So if this torch is spread, in humanity generally, and often it is, and sometimes it isn't. But even if it has the influence of a few, it does some good, it does some work. So to me, you have to educate humanity to be better than they are at the moment. And education, you start off right from the beginning. And there is a Aramaic verse in Hebrew. It's actually Aramaic. It's Gersa de Yankusa. What you learn when you are a child, you remember always. So if you inculcate into children from the age of kindergarten goodness and moral values, it cannot but create a better world.
And do you think we're doing a good job right now? Do you think that we are educating the youth, that they're thinking?
In some places, yes. In some places, no. I mean, I think even in Canada, a lot of it, for example, the way we treat Indigenous people, I find it horrendous. For example, I've been very much involved with Indigenous people on the March of Remembrance and Hope. You always have some Indigenous people that come with us from university, they study. And I have even made a short film called Without Words with one of these school what do they call the school survivor
residential schools.
Well, which one?
Residential schools.
Yeah, residential. She was a residential school survivor, and her daughter went with me on the March of Remembrance and Home. Eventually, I met the family in Sudbury, and we made a film which has won now quite a few prizes, 17, just exposing, a Holocaust survivor with a residential school survivor, and then it's called Without Words. It's a very short, 17 minutes, but it's very beautiful. So, that is that's my belief, that it's sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. You just have to try. You have to. If you don't succeed once, you try again and again and again and again. And that's the only way you can get somewhere. It's been working like this through history. Look, the reason why we are still in existence, because we had temples and we had kings. But things were changing. And eventually, because of a very great man, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he smuggled himself out of Jerusalem when Jerusalem was being achieved, by the Romans. He asked permission, he went to Yavne, started a yeshiva, and from being a people of kings and queens, we became people of the book. And because of the people of the book, because of education, we still exist today. So why can't this can be achieved again and again and again? But you've got to try. If you don't try, you don't get nowhere.
And do you see a lot of similarities when you were speaking to the indigenous communities? And that's interesting because it's something which the other Holocaust survivor I'd spoken to had mentioned. What is that relationship and what is that dialogue like? Do you see a lot of similarities between your experience and their experience? Do you understand one another at a deeper level than maybe other people do?
Well, I certainly, when I come into contact with them, and I haven't, I've only, my experience has been either personal, because I became friendly. I also became very friendly with Muslim people that came with me on March of Remembrance and Home. I went to their weddings and things. So it's an individual thing that I've come. I have not had the honor of speaking to a crowd of indigenous people because I've never been invited, and there haven't been. I had an idea of starting a March of Remembrance and Hope in Canada. Get Canadians, white Canadians, French and English speaking Canadians, to go on a bus and go to reservations and listen to the elders and to the older people telling stories of what happened to them and learn what the experience of the indigenous people was. But this has to start from the top. I can't start from the bottom. It's got to start from the top. And I tried, and I went to Sudbury, and I did. And of course, the chiefs, they've got their own agendas and things like that. But generally, whenever I come into contact with indigenous people in my own personal way, I understand their suffering. They understand my suffering. And we very much hope that the indigenous people will get a better deal what they have been getting so far, because it's always talk, but they're not getting very far. And in the United States, it's even worse, because in the United States, black people are still suffering like they suffered in the old days. The discrimination against blacks in America is horrendous.
It's funny, when you mention things like that, it's very funny that you have a very hopeful outlook and that you're very optimistic. Sometimes when you look around, there's a lot of discouraging signs.
But things are getting better. I mean, you just have to. You can't change everything overnight. That is the problem. That people believe that you can either do this or that, but in 24 hours, it doesn't work that way. It's very slow. It's very slow. As a matter of fact, I made a speech once, and which I don't know, you may see, it's actually on the internet. And President Obama quoted me, when I said that, it's like a drop on a pebble out in the water. It takes thousands of years to make it smooth. And I always carry a pebble like that in my pocket. And whenever I think things are getting bad, I take that pebble out and I rub it in my hand and I think to myself, how many thousands of years did it take for this little pebble to get so smooth and so warm and so comforting? Well, it's going to take a long time. But the fact is that it's getting better. And what is more important is by Holocaust survivors talking and trying and telling people the optimism and what can be achieved, and in a very small way, if it increases a drop a year, it's worthwhile. And it is happening. You can see the signs. Today is better than 100 years ago. I mean, it's worse on the one hand because we've got, all the television, we've got iPad, we see all these things happening. But a lot of these things that were happening, the killing and the maiming and the suffering of slaves, and I mean, you take slavery in Russia and slavery in America was very recent. Until the 60s, blacks couldn't even take the bus properly. They had to have benches. In South Africa, everything was apartheid. Things have changed. So, things are changing. It takes a long time. And the important thing is to strive and to work. That each individual person, to the best of his ability, should try and make the world a little better. And the education should be along those lines. Don't try and change the world overnight, but try a little bit, one by one by one, and then you will achieve the end of it. And one day the Messiah will come. You don't know when. Nobody knows when the Messiah is going to come. And you don't know what kind of Messiah, and you don't know which way he's going to come. But one day it will. It will happen. The world is going to be better than it is today. It's definitely going to be better tomorrow or the day after. That's the way I believe.
That's it for our chat with Pinchas Gutter. We wanted to thank him as well as the Azrieli Foundation for their cooperation in helping us do a proper spotlight of International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Below in the show notes, you can find links to the organization as well as Pinchas's book, which is available on Amazon. Until next time, thank you very much.